It's the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. Hello, Jersey football fans. I'm Dan Long, and on today's episode, I'll be joined by NJ.com football beat writers Ryan Patty, Bill Evans, Joe Zadalis, and Mike Kinney, as we'll talk about Bergen Catholic's complete domination of Winslow, how the Shore Conference is officially upside down, the latest updates in Essex County and in the Big Central Conference. I'll also ask the guys who's one player that's caught their eye in week 2, as well as one thing that they've learned so far this season. We'll have a roundtable discussion of our NJ.com top 20, as well as finally previewing week 3's biggest matchups around New Jersey. So starting off on last week's episode, we preview the huge matchup between number 1 Bergen Catholic and number 4 Winslow, and the game was touted as being arguably the biggest game in South Jersey football history. Well, Bergen Catholic put on a show for the South Jersey football faithful who got their first in-person look at the 4-time reigning number 1 team in New Jersey, as the Crusaders scored the game's first 41 unanswered points on their way to a 41-14 blowout victory. Ryan Patty, why is there such a gap now between the top non-publics and public schools in New Jersey?
Yeah, Dan, first I want to start by saying Winslow is a great team, and it's very possible that they could run the table here, as Bill will talk about soon. And, they have Augustin this week. It's going to be a tough game, but, they're that good where they could run the table. And Coach Belton has them in a really good spot as a program. And, it's games like this that are going to get you better. And Winslow will get better, and they're going to be more motivated. And if I were to pick a Group 4 champ today, it's got to be Winslow. But this, mountain that public schools are climbing here, with, trying to beat the top team, top non-public team in the state, whether it's, peak Don Bosco from a couple years ago, peak Bergen Catholic now. It's almost impossible with, Friday being the latest example. This game was over in a blink, and Bergen, plays these games under the spotlight like this just about every week. So this was nothing new for them. We mentioned Friday's game being a north-south thing, but, when you really boil it down, it's not really. Like, you look at the players on Bergen, a lot of Shore Conference area guys, a lot of South Jersey guys. Xavier Jackson's from Willingboro. Lamar Best is from Willingboro, just to name a few kids. But, what makes this lopsided, in my opinion, when we see it, it's, this is what non-publics can do. They can go out and get the 11 best kids at every position, and then like 2 more kids on top of that. They're able to recruit 5 massive offensive linemen. I remember talking with Bill at the Battle at the Beach when we were, standing on Bergen's sideline, and he was like, I can't believe this sideline. And I was like, I'm used to this. Like, this is the sidelines, Bergen, Bosco, St. Joe's, every week they're lined pylon to pylon with 7th and 8th graders, trying to see what it's like to play for those kind of schools. And, it's the fact that, that they're able to pull kids from anywhere. Austin Busso's from Staten Island. Jermaine Kinsler went to school in Florida a few years ago. So look at the rosters. Every single player on Bergen Catholic is a dude. Every single player can play. It doesn't matter, where they are on the depth chart, what position. Like, pick a kid, that kid can play. You look at Amari Newell. He's not a starter in Bergen's base defense. And, maybe his performance this past week, and then in week 0 when he returned the block punt for a touchdown, maybe it gets Coach DeBells to run more like nickel or dime and he's on the field more. But regardless, it just shows how deep and talented Bergen is. And, it depends on the circumstance. Like, could Winslow and Paramus Catholic or Del Barton or whatever this year play a great game? I absolutely think so. And you go back to a couple years ago, Cherokee and St. Joe's. I think I'm being objective when I say it wasn't like a world-beating St. Joe's team, the COVID year. They lost some games that year, and I would say they were behind Bergen and Peters and Del Barton. But you took a good public school in Cherokee and a middle-of-the-pack non-pub team, and it was a good game. But, and I think the same would happen this year, and you're going to get that this week with Augustin. But ultimately, with the top non-public team, in this case it's Bergen. It's been St. Joe's in years past, St. Peter's in 2019, Paramus Catholic when they had Jabril Peppers. It's rotated. Bosco with, Coach Toll. They've traded places, but with, whatever that top team is, it's simply not a fair fight at all with a public school. It's just not.
And I have to say, guys, that in hearing around this program and before this game, They were so laser focused because of out of respect for Winslow that they did not see them as maybe what others would have seen in years past of, oh, this is just a public school. We're just going to loosey goosey get out there and put our helmets out and we're going to win. Bergen Catholic, maybe they're also really, into the podcast and they're loyal listeners to the Jersey Blitz. They heard the questions about could they run the football? Well, they ran for over 250 yards. They heard, the questions of can they slow down the passing game from Winslow? And they have maybe the best secondary in the state. So it's very interesting in that regard that Bergen Catholic was laser focused. On the other side of the equation, Bill Evans, what went wrong so quickly for Winslow in this matchup?
Yeah, following up a little bit on what Ryan said, I mean, I think there's a couple tiers now. I mean, I think Bergen is in a tier of itself. They haven't lost the game in the state in 3 or 4 years. Maybe right below that is Bosco and St. Joe's, and then I think then you get into the Winslows and the Del Bartons, the St. Augustines, the Paramus Catholics. I don't think the game. I think Bergen Catholic played close to a perfect game. I think Winslow played their worst game. Now, if they played 10 times, I think Bergen would probably win 10 times. But you go back 2 weeks, IMG was ranked fifth in the country. I think Bergen was sixth coming in. And Winslow was right there with IMG, one touchdown game late in the third quarter. So I don't know that the disparity is as great as it showed on the field. I think definitely Bergen's better. It's kind of unfortunate in the sense that Winslow doesn't have as many opportunities to kind of show themselves in a game like this. And, people might look at it and say, well, this just shows, for the next 5, 10 years, a public school can't ever compete. I'm not sure that's the case. I mean, I look back a couple of years and I remember Bergen lost to Bosco in the regular season, and then in the championship game they beat them 45-0. And if you looked at that game, you would say, well, Bosco would never compete with Bergen, even though they did a few weeks earlier. I think that this was a little bit of an anomaly just in terms of the domination, but I don't think it's just like I said, it's a statement for all time that the non-publics are going to be will beat a top public team like this every single time. What I think went wrong was a couple things. I was impressed with Bergen's physicality. I thought going into the IMG game that Winslow would struggle when you looked at the size that IMG had to across the board was even bigger than Bergen is. Everybody was 6'4", 6'5", 320. Did not struggle to the extent that they did against Bergen. Bergen just offensive line on defensive line especially didn't even throw a pass the first two drives. They just ran the ball right down their throat, and that was very impressive. And it kind of caught me a little bit by surprise. I know Bergen is strong in that area, but just based on what happened against IMG, I didn't think they dominate to that regard. We also talked about the turnover battle and how they couldn't lose it. And for the second straight time, going back to the IMG game, they lost that 3-0. There were 3 interceptions there for Bergen Catholic. And again, similar to the IMG game when they got down 21-0, in that scenario, they were able to fight back. Just hard to do against this caliber team time and time again. So I think it was the turnovers, I think it was the physicality, and I think it was just getting down early and what that did to them physically, what that did to them mentally. I think those factors are why this game got out of hand.
Bill, being there, what kind of sense did you get? I'm curious about the fans watching that. Either they were Winslow fans or neutral observers of the first time actually getting to see Bergen Catholic, who typically stay up north. What was that like in terms of what you kind of thought, all right, this is what we've always heard of Bergen Catholic. What did the fans kind of see? And then also, where does Winslow go from here? They're not going to be playing anyone close to the caliber of Bergen Catholic the rest of the season. How do they get that mojo back?
Yeah, I mean, it was a decent crowd. I mean, I think I've, like the Battle of the Beach crowds, I think have been a little bigger, for some of these marquee matchups. But it was a good crowd. I just think that, the way that the game played out in Bergen, obviously Bergen brought a nice crowd themselves, and they were really into it. I think, Bergen kind of took the Winslow crowd out of the game pretty early. So I think that kind of sucked a lot of the energy out of the stadium. But I think people were, obviously happy to see, not happy, but, I think, that they were glad to get a chance to see one of these great teams to come down south. which obviously doesn't happen too often. Obviously, you had to be impressed with the way that they played. Where Winslow goes from here is to St. Augustine, and that's not an easy game. St. Augustine is very strong defensively, very good on the lines. Again, we've seen Winslow struggle with that. That they have a Cam Green on the offensive lines going to Rutgers. You have Damari Simeon on the defensive line going to Ohio State. You have Nick Costa on the defensive line going to Northwestern. So they're going to have to they're going to have to play a lot better on the lines, and they're really going to have to kind of get back to the drawing board. If they're feeling sorry about themselves, they could lose this game. I mean, I would definitely favor Winslow, but they have to be more physical and they have to be focused. That they can't be having a pity party because St. Augustine is definitely capable of beating them. And I think in some ways maybe this is a good thing. They can kind of get back on track. And as Ryan said, if they do that, I think they have even though they play some good teams down the road, Mainland, Camden, Millville, they definitely have a chance to run the table.
Ryan, we constantly kind of are doing this each and every week now for the last couple of seasons. How does someone beat Bergen Catholic? It's the $1 million question. It's the question that no one has been able to answer in state for so long. In looking at this team after you've seen them now twice this season, what do you think a game plan should be for somebody if they have the correct personnel?
Yeah, I just think it comes down to effort, Dan, and beating Bergen at their own game of physicality and not being intimidated at the big moment. I look back to that game against Bosco 3 years ago, which, I mean, it was 3 years ago. It's been a while. But 31-7, Bosco ran the ball, Chase Basantis, Moreno, those guys pounded the ball. And yeah, they kind of beat Bergen at their own game. And I talked to Vito after, and he said this is never going to happen again. And it really hasn't, besides the game against IMG and, Shaman Madonna obviously, did very well against them. But, and I live walking distance from Bergen Catholic, but I don't, I don't have like red and gold pom-poms, but I could see with my own eyes here, like, how much more each game and each moment means to them than everyone else. And, I think that it comes from Coach Vito and the culture he's instilled and, Coach/AD, Brendan McGovern and how much he pours into it. So, with Bergen, like you can't even look at those guys the wrong way or you're going to pay for it. And, Bill and Kevin were there on Friday and they could attest to it. Like, you could just see it in Bergen's eyes and feel their energy. Like they wanted to win that game by 1,000,000 points. And that's how they play every week. They heard all the noise and saw the, prognostications and they respect Winslow highly. Vito said it after the game, but they wanted to make a point on Friday and drop the hammer down. And they did. And I'm not saying that, these other teams don't care as much. Like Augie Hoffman coached my brother. I've known for years now, the tight ship he runs. And, that's a guy. He's a winner. He's a pro. Dan Sabella, everywhere he's gone, good things have happened. Richie Hansen, Greg Russo, Nick Campanelli, Brian Bowers, like all these guys have been instrumental in winning operations for their respective schools. But there's no program running things like Bergen Catholic right now. There's just not. But with that, I think that this is the best St. Joe's team we've seen in a while. And, this could be the most skilled Bosco team we've seen in a while. Like Coach Sabella's been, waiting years for like all-stars like this at receiver and corner. He's got a great tight end in Garachi. So and St. Peter's, like, forget about it. Like it's night and day compared to the last few years. Like this team's legit this year. So, and even DePaul, they won a state title last year. And they've kept it close with Bergen. When they've matched up in years past, they haven't played the last couple of years, but they've kept it respectable. And I just think that Bergen's still the team to beat. I'm not going to predict them to lose. I think they could lose, but I'm not going to predict it. They're on another level right now, Dan.
And they like to operate, if you kind of remember with the Last Dance documentary with Michael Jordan, Bergen Catholic, they look for any type of motivation to spark them even more so. And I think they love to read when people pick against them. I think they love to hear that they're overrated. And that's, again, part of Coach Campanelli's, mindset of how do you get motivated as you're going to be the hunted each and every week. So that's a breakdown of that first real big game of the year that we had in New Jersey last week between Bergen Catholic and Winslow. And bringing on to the show now, Joe Zadalis to talk about the Shore Conference and what a conference it has become, where each week you're seeing different big-time upsets happening. And Well, you have Homedale being that one that made that huge statement this past week, Joe, while Red Bank Catholic continues to dominate on their own.
No, Dan, I don't know whether what you just said is a good thing or a bad thing. Um, I mean, just look at what's happened the first 3 weeks of the football season. Week 0, Red Bank Catholic blanks Towns River North. Towns River North falls out of the top 20. Week 1, Rumson looks like absolute world beaters. They destroyed Brick Memorial. Brick Memorial falls out of the top 20. Then last week, well, Homedale was the world because they beat Rumson. Um, I, I don't think anybody south of exit 114 on the Garden State Parkway saw Homedale beating Rumson. I just don't. But Homedale has Superman, and that's Jack Cannon, the senior quarterback who's headed to Dartmouth, and he just flat out injected himself right into the middle of either the offensive player of the year or the overall player of the year picture with a phenomenal game. Um, and the one thing it did prove, and about the short conference, if you don't play well in the short conference, you're going to lose. And Rumson did not play well. They turned the ball over. They couldn't get off the field. Granted, they played without their outstanding running back, Kellen Murray, who we may not see till next month, but we will see. But this kid Cannon right now is the toast of the Shore Conference. I mean, in the 33-21 victory, Dan, he had 130 yards passing and 200 yards rushing. I can't think of the last time Rumson gave up 200 yards rushing. I mean, in his career, he's already got 3,400 passing and 2,000 rushing. So, and really, not to take anything away from the other kids on Homedale, he is a one-man band. He beats teams single-handedly. I know head coach Noel Kavanaugh has done a really good job with the scheme, formationally and finding ways to get Cannon a crack or a little bit of space, and that's all he needs. So, and I'll be honest with you, Dan, this trend of upsets or craziness, I don't see it ending anytime soon. I mean, not a week on the 26th of September, Red Bank Catholic hosts Homedale. On the 10th of October, Rumson plays RBC. Tonsor North, which right now is struggling horribly, still has a shot at Brick Memorial. Brick Memorial, they got the quarterback back, so, they're looking to make a run, but, this just isn't going to end. And, the short conference is going to be competitive the rest of the year, and there are going to be plenty of big games down the road.
And it was such a fun atmosphere at the game that I called on Friday night at Brick Memorial because they were going toe-to-toe with a Point Pleasant Burroughs side that, Joe, they had scored a total of 10 points through their first 2 games, yet they produced 4 consecutive touchdown drives and had a lead going into the fourth quarter before Brick Memorial erupted and made some plays and obviously getting their quarterback Lajara back into the fold. Its parity has found its way down the shore, and I think it makes it a lot of fun because you don't know who's going to be showing up and who's going to be standing out each and every week.
Well, I think it was only a matter of time before, Point Borough worked the bugs out of that double wing, triple option offense. Brian Staub is too good a coach. I just don't think they're as big and physical up front as they have been the last 2, 3, 4 years. So, really they were no match for Rumson up front. But that offense can score points on anybody when it is being run effectively. And Jake Clayton, he's a magician with the ball. As you know, that offense is all about play fakes and putting the ball on your hip and moving around, and he does a great job of that. And of course, now, Brick Memorial had, except for against Rumson, has no trouble scoring points even without Jason LaQuara. But with him back now, that's just another dimension. This is a kid who can extend plays with his feet. This is a kid who can, pull disaster from, the jaws of it and turn it into a big play. So like I said, Dan, this is every single week. And we're only talking about the two big divisions here in the Shore. This stuff goes on every week in the Shore Conference within those 8 divisions.
Well, it's a lot of fun to be covering the Shore Conference, and we also just got word that we will also be in a couple weeks' time there for a great matchup, Red Bank Catholic versus Rumson Fairhaven. So we're going to be really having a lot of fun when we get to broadcast that on our NJ.com airwaves as one of our games of the week. So shifting from the Shore Conference, we bring in Mike Kinney to talk about the Big Central Conference. And Mike, here's a blunt question for you. Is the Big Central weaker this season than it has been over the last couple of campaigns?
Yeah, Dan, I think there seems to be the impression that it's weaker because the only top 20 team right now is Phillipsburg, and there are 59 schools in the Big Central. So you would think there would be some more representation there. But I'm here to say that it is not weak, not at all. It's very competitive. One of the things about it right now is there's a lot of young teams. There's been a lot of turnover, and so we're looking at a lot of teams that are just sort of now getting into their rhythm. I think of a team like Elizabeth with Arik Fleming and at quarterback there. There, so many of their guys, so many of that team are juniors. He's a budding junior. He's going to be one of the best guys in the state. There's no question about it, and he's destined for great things, but maybe not quite right now on a consistent basis. Most of his skill guys are non-seniors, and so I look at this team as a team that is going to really start proving things. They had a great win in their first week. They have a tough game here against St. Joe's this weekend, and that's going to be a proving ground for them. But he's a kid with a tremendous amount of talent. He's got a lot of talent around them. Can't forget in their case that this is a team that had 3 coaches last year. And Eugene Klein ended up stepping in and being the interim coach last year and kind of settled things down. And he's now the head coach. And now there's that state of constancy that was not there all year last year. I see Piscataway as a rising team, and a team that's going to be better immediately this week with the addition of 2 transfers from St. Thomas, Josiah Zayas, who's going to Iowa State and is a tremendous athlete, wide receiver and safety, and Mikhi Simmons, who's going to come in and help out their backfield and also in the secondary. So I think immediately this coming week, we're going to see a much stronger Piscataway secondary. We're going to see a much stronger Piscataway skill group. And it's the Piscataway team that beat Old Bridge last week in a really great game. And I had said to my colleagues the other day, we were talking about top 20 and wondering, what Big Central teams are there on the cusp waiting to get in the top 20. And I said, the Piscataway Old Bridge game was a game that, though nominally was not a top 20 game, to me, I was covering a top 20 game. The athletic ability by both teams, the play of Brody Nugent, the quarterback at Old Bridge, both his ability to scramble, his ability to throw off the waggle, their ability to come back from a 14-0 deficit in the first 5 minutes of the game. Piscataway showed their youth by allowing Old Bridge back in the game, but then showed their ability and the explosive running of Zaire Young in the second half to take control of the game. So I see Piscataway. I see Elizabeth. I certainly see St. Joe's Metuchen. I think St. Thomas Aquinas is a team that's there knocking on the door again. Don't count out Old Bridge. And I don't think he can count out Bridgewater Raritan right now as one of my surprises. They're 3-0. They're playing tremendous football with a whole bunch of athletes. And I can't wait to see them against Hunter and Central this week, though Hunter and Central took a knock. And of course, you can't forget Phillipsburg because they are legitimately there. They're the top 20 team. They are right now the beacon of the conference. But I'm telling you, I'm enjoying the competition out of this conference this year. I'm really enjoying it. And you can't also forget the teams in the Big Central that are not right now going to be top 20 teams because of their size Bernard just having a spectacular year again at the Group 2 team. Summit at Group 3 is a very strong team. They're 3-0. Spotswood is a really strong team right now in Group 2. Manville is a team to watch. There are a lot of smaller group teams in this conference that are really going to make a lot of noise in the state in the playoffs in Group 1, in Group 2, and Group 3. I really believe that. And right now, you're not seeing it in the top 20. You're not seeing it maybe in some of the stats, but the balance that's there is going to start really to gel, and we're going to see some really strong teams by the end of the year. And I have a lot of faith in that happening.
And I'm looking forward, Mike, to seeing in person on Saturday Elizabeth take on St. Joe's Metuchen in our Saturday broadcast game of the week here on NJ.com. So we'll see for ourselves if those teams can have what it takes to maybe vault their way into the top 20 alongside the likes of a Phillipsburg.
Yeah,
All
two
right,
excellent
guys.
Quarterbacks there, Dan. Justin Scaramuzzo at St. Joe's. I'm talking about Eric Fleming like he's the god of Big Central. Justin Scaramuzzo, if he hears this, he's going to be, watch, I can fling that ball a little bit too. So, yeah, absolutely. St. Joe's, very strong team, and Bill Tracy, an excellent coach over there. So they are really, really hoping, really trying to prepare themselves to be the team at the the next level. St. Joe's, obviously with all the great non-publics all over the state, they are not a team that you look at and say, well, they're a powerhouse, and they understand that now, but they can be a powerhouse in their region, and right now they would take that.
It'll be fun. It's going to be the first time that we're going to have our broadcast team at St. Joe's Metuchen for one of our football broadcasts. So we'll see if they could take that next step. And who doesn't like a good quarterback battle when we get to see those two line it up on Saturday? All right, guys. So now it's going to be time. I'm going to ask that each of you give me one player that hasn't been highlighted yet on any of our podcasts that's caught your eye in week 2. We're going to start with Ryan Patty. Who is somebody that's starting to stand out for you after you covered them last week?
Yeah, I was very impressed with Danny Ferraiulo from Wayne Valley. And, he's a quarterback who's grown up really fast. Roger Kotler's did a great job with him over the last couple of years. And, it's pretty neat to see him pick up right where he left off last year with Chris Benaquista this year. He's got 8 touchdowns, only 1 pick. He's 46 to 61 passing. And, they were in the game 2 weeks ago against Northern Highlands, a team we have ranked. They had a chance to win that game. They had a bad snap that kind of derailed their chance to tie it. But Ferraiulo, he gives them a shot to win each week, and he takes this offense to another level. Benaquista, kind of runs that wing T stuff that he did at West Essex. It's a lot more out of the shotgun. It's variations of it, but it's out of the shotgun. And the bottom line really is just it's downhill running. And it's the run that sets up the pass for Ferraiulo. And, his play has just taken this offense to, new heights. And like I said, Kotler's, who's now at Marist now as an assistant, he did a great job with Danny. And, for context on Ferraiulo's stats, he had 14 touchdowns and 9 picks all of last year. And he's on pace now with 8 touchdowns, 1 pick to, just obliterate those numbers. And, that's the type of play you want to see from your senior quarterback. And that's ultimately the type of play that is going to win you multiple playoff games in what should be a very fun Group 4 this year.
Bill Evans, who are a couple of players that caught your eye in this past week 2 action?
Yeah, I've given you 2. Just one from Millville, Reggie Holly, who I saw opening week for Millville against Rancocas Valley. They were really struggling to move the football, and they put him in. He's a wide receiver. They put him in as a wildcat, and they went on 2 touchdown drives with him running the football. And then, this past week, more as a receiver, they were down against Mainland 0-2 with games coming up against Washington Township and Winslow. And, he brought them back, caught an 80-yard touchdown pass, and then ran in a 2-point conversion, and they won 22-21. He had 9 catches for 164. And look, there's a lot of questions about how Millville was going to replace Slotsier Brooks, and obviously you can't. I mean, nobody's, he's one of the greatest wide receivers we've ever seen in the state. But with Slotsier gone, I mean, Reggie Holly is really stepping up and showing that he's a player. The other one is Mackay Parker from Glassboro, and again another kid that is overshadowed a little bit because he's playing alongside Xavier and Amari Saab. But this kid's phenomenal. He only a sophomore. They ran a trick play against Pensgrove where Xavier Saab threw the ball about 40 yards downfield, and he went up between two players, took a hit, on his feet, and ran the rest of the way for a 70-yard touchdown. He has not 10 catches for 276 yards and 3 scores, and he's making himself known on a team with some of the best recruits in the entire state. So he's the next one there. Just an embarrassment of riches at Glassboro, but Mekhi Parker is really starting to make a name for himself as well.
Mike Kinney, is there somebody that stood out to you in week 2?
Josh Allen from Woodbridge. Here's a kid who last year, he was a good player last year, very good player out of the defensive secondary. I don't think anybody would have really known very much about him as an offensive player at all. We had the Anderson brothers last year, if anybody remembers, Brian and Derek Anderson, twins, quarterback and receiver, and Jameer Beal and Isaiah Tolliver was a great wide receiver, and Jameer Beal was basically their top runner. Senior group of skill guys who were the men last year, no doubt about it. They led Woodbridge to a 10-1 record. And Josh was a kid who was a strong guy in a very strong secondary, but even there, he was a guy who was sort of secondary to the Andersons. He was a good player, but he was not the feature guy back there. He was the guy some of the quarterbacks were trying to expose because of his inexperience. This guy this year, unbelievable. Like their offense, Joe George has completely changed the offense now, which in his career, what a tremendous job he does with his multiple triple option of getting the ball to his top guys and letting them show their ability. 3 games, Woodbridge is now 3-0, which is in and of itself a big surprise to me. But this kid has rushed 80 times for 676 yards and 9 touchdowns in 3 games. Here's a kid didn't know anything about his offensive ability last year at all. If you had asked me, I'd have mentioned 6 other guys at Woodbridge who probably, would be the guys next year to carry the torch for them offensively. And he has just transformed this offense. Now it's a ground attack with the young quarterback who's just kind of learning his way through here. Dylan Stevens is a sophomore. He's the quarterback. He's in that position, and all of a sudden he's in a comfortable position because he's just handing off to this kid. And Woodbridge is an offense now that everybody's got to worry about because of his explosiveness and his speed. So this kid Josh Allen has really opened my eyes, and I'm sure everybody else in the conference that has to deal with him now.
And down the shore, Joe Zadalis, who are you looking at from a great performance in week 2?
I'm going to give you 2, Dan. This young man, Amir Massey from Asbury Park, has had back-to-back 200 games, leading Asbury to a 2-0 start, which is a miracle in itself, given all the things and all the troubles that program has had in the last 4 years. I mean, they went 4 straight years with a different head coach. Things have settled down a little bit. Things seem to be on the upswing. He's a very good player. He certainly has opened people's eyes, and what he's done so far is amazing. We'll find out a little bit more about Asbury Park in the next 2 weeks. They play Ocean Township this week, and then down the road they go play their longtime Thanksgiving rival Neptune, which should be a hell of a game. But the other kid who caught my eye, and all he did was make one play, and that was senior defensive back Ace Williams from Southern Regional. Intercepted a pass and returned it 100 yards for a touchdown. Dan, I was thinking back, and I forgot more football than I remember at this stage of my life. But I think maybe I've seen one 100-yard play in 48 years, and this kid made it. Central Regional was on the 2-yard line. A pass was slightly tipped at the line of scrimmage. This kid jumped in front of the wide receiver, picked it off, and then, took off for the other end zone. And as he got to the, far 10 and 20-yard line, he thought he had run a mile. He never realized how far 100 yards is. But Southern's off to a 3-0 start. They're playing great defense. This kid already has 3 interceptions. So the other guy who caught my eye this week, Ace Williams from Southern Regional, Dan.
All right, guys. So we looked at a player that stood out for you in week 2. What's one thing that each of you have learned so far throughout the beginning of this season, where some teams have played 3 games, other teams have played 2? What have you learned so far, starting off with Ryan?
Yeah, Dan, I'm looking around the SFC and NJIC, and I see a lot of games, a lot of divisions, and honestly, the top spots in both conferences, respectively, that are up for grabs. And like I just said earlier in the episode, I would pick Bergen to finish this year as the best team in the SFC. But would my jaw be dropped if St. Joe's or Bosco or DePaul finished the year number 1? Of course not. In the NJIC, Hawthorne was tied with Butler in the fourth quarter last week, and you saw Butler against Beckton. I'd say they're the best team in the conference still, but I think that gap is narrowing. And you look at the job Glen Rock's doing. You look at Steve Dunn over there at Rutherford. Those two teams are both doing a very good job, and I think that conference is up for grabs. Ramapo, Otapan, Northern Highlands, like that trio is always alive in North Jersey. Like, which is the best team there? Who's going to win the Battle of Wayne this year? Both Wayne teams look really good. The NJIC, the Ivy in the SFC, it's up for grabs. Demrest, Belleville, Fort Lee. There's a lot of teams that are looking good to start the year, and ultimately, I think what you're getting in most cases, through the first 3 weeks, is that it's a bit of a wait and see game, and people can say that that's boring, sure, but I think it's pretty exciting because that means we still have a whole lot to unpack here. And, the journey to Rutgers and MetLife is just going to be fascinating as the weeks go on.
Bill, what have you learned so far this season?
Well, Washington Township and Marincocas Valley seem to be on a collision course. I again saw both of those at the Battle of the Beach. They played on the same day, and Washington Township dominated their game against Hillsborough in the afternoon, and his RV was kind of lighting up Millville at night. I kind of pulled out my phone just to, double check to see when that game was, that when those two teams will play, which is October 10th. But I think it might be the first of 2 times, especially with Toms River North seemingly struggling right now. I mean, this seems like, this could be a state semifinal in late November. Township is, pitched 2 straight shutouts. They've scored over 40 points in 3 straight games. Again, they were a veteran team that brought everybody back and had a lot of high hopes, and they're living up to every last one of them so far. And, RV's also out to a 3-0 start. Their outstanding quarterback, Savion Adams, missed this past week. I don't think he's supposed to be out long term. They obviously need him, but they got 2 defensive linemen, David Ogunzola, who's a junior, and Michael Beasley, who's a sophomore, they were both all group 5 picks last year, despite their young age, and they are both out to incredible starts. They had, as a team, they had 12 sacks against Camden Eastside, and you sometimes you look at those numbers and question them, but it's real. Beasley had 5, Ogunzola had 4 on the season. Beasley has 9, Ogunzola has 8. They just, every play they're just meeting at the quarterback. I mean, they're both getting an amazing pass rush. It's like the Mount Holly sack exchange for those of you guys old enough to get that reference. But I think one of those guys could be the defensive player of the year for us, and I'm just not sure who. But they're just fun to watch, and are so dominant. And those 2 teams, like I said, I kind of can't wait for those matchups because they've both kind of lived up to the billing, and there's a couple players there that are really just standing out and showing that they're among the best in the state.
Mike Kinney, what's one thing that you've learned so far in the beginning of this 2025 football season?
Cedar Grove is Cedar Grove is Cedar Grove, Dan. This program, this little Group 1 program up in the northern part of Essex County, is just never ceases to amaze me. How consistent they are year after year after year. I was sure they were taking somewhat of a dip. How could you not, when you lost the best quarterback who ever played in the program last year, graduated, Stephen Paradiso, threw for almost 8,000 yards. So we're not talking about a good quarterback. We're talking about a generational quarterback at Cedar Grove. And Jackson Maurice, his receiver, had around 3,000 yards receiving in his career. So 2 unbelievable players, 2 of the best at their positions that Cedar Grove probably ever had. And this got to take a drop. Well, first game of the season, they played Group 4 Wayne Valley, and Ryan just talked about how Wayne Valley is on an upswing, and how strong they are. And Cedar Grove almost beat them, lost by a touchdown. Then they came back and they beat Weequahic the next week, and then last week they beat Verona 41-7. This kid Pierce Osphage, who's the junior quarterback now, he's just kind of stepped in and doing, certainly not with the consistency of Stephen Paradiso, but with the confidence. Nothing's changed there. Rob Gogarty does a tremendous job of instilling confidence in his guys that they can run his air raid offense and they can be as tough as anything on defense, and they can beat teams. They can run up and down the field and have a lot of fun playing football, and that's exactly what these guys are doing. So they're 2-1 right now, and their only loss is right now. Hats off to them for playing a much bigger school and a game they're going to learn plenty from. So Cedar Grove didn't think so, but they're a team that we're all going to have to deal with if you're a Group 1 school in North 1 playoffs later in the year. And divisionally, they're going to be a team that's going to be there winning like the Panthers always do.
And Josie, what have you learned so far throughout the course of your travels in the Shore Conference?
Dan, I'm just going to elaborate a little bit more on what I talked about in my first segment, and that's that nothing is a given in 2025 in the Shore Conference. There are only 8 winless teams in the Shore Conference at this point. I don't know that there will be a winless team in the Shore Conference at the end. The football in the Shore Conference is not great. It's in some cases not even good, but the competitiveness is fantastic, and that's what the Shore Conference hierarchy wanted to do when it assembled these divisions, is create competitive schedules and keep programs alive. There are 2 or 3 teams that are in contention in all 8 divisions. Just last week alone, Townsville East, which has really struggled the last few years, they score a 7-0 victory over previously unbeaten Barnegat. The East offensive line was so dominant in the second half, Barnegat ran just 4 plays. Lakewood had 500 yards of offense in each of its first 2 games. Pinelands comes in, has a good scheme and a good plan by defensive coordinator Joe Adelizi, shuts them out. We talked about Bergen Catholic and Raritan. Both won games last week with backup quarterbacks. And Bill said Townsville North seemingly struggling. There's no seemingly. They are. They've been shut out in 2 of their first 3 games. They cannot generate any offense. They cannot throw the football. Right now, they can't move people off the line of scrimmage. I don't know what Dave Oz is going to do. But right now, North has serious problems, and they're a loss away from becoming irrelevant in their own division. And then you have Monmouth Regional. It'll be the last team I mention here. They were outscored 394-91 last year. They started between freshman and sophomore, 18 kids who were either freshman or sophomore, all 11 on defense. And they're 2-1 and they're tied for first place. So, there are going to be some big games ahead in the Shore Conference, but don't assume anything, because if it's Murphy's Law, anything that can happen will happen in the Shore in 2025, Dan.
Now, guys, it's time for our weekly roundtable discussion about the top 20, according to our NJ.com top 20 in the state. We'll start off with Bill. What do you see right now in terms of teams from the South in the top 20? And then we're going to open it up to Ryan and then anybody else. If you want to make your arguments, as maybe Mike has said earlier on when talking about the Big Central, if there's somebody that should be included in the top 20 or even somebody that should be bounced from the top 20, we'll have an open discussion with you guys. But starting off, Bill, what do you see with the top 20 when it comes to South Jersey teams?
Yeah, at the beginning of the year, we talked about being Winslow, and then obviously a next tier, but thought it was very deep. I think we started the year with 6 teams in the top 20, and I think that depth is showing itself. It's in some ways it's allowed for different teams to come into the top 20, but it's also kicked some teams out. Mainland and Millville, I think, are still pretty solid teams, but they've taken a couple losses and they've gotten bounced. Camden and Atlantic City came in last week, and they got they both lost. Atlantic City going down to Cedar Creek, and Camden losing to Shawnee, and they got bounced. And now this week, Burlington Township has moved in at number 19, and they've had a couple strong years here. They've had a big win over Passaic Tech to start the year, and a couple dominant wins since. And again, a solid program under Steve Everett there, who's a very good coach, has shown that with a number of programs. So I think what we've seen is that depth, and we've had some churn at the bottom because this is a team, this is an area that could be 15, 20 teams deep, and it's going to be tough for these teams to not lose a couple games, and that's why we've seen some of the turnover that we've had, and I wouldn't be surprised going forward if that continued, if a couple other teams jumped into the rankings at some point, and a few others fell out, because I do think beyond Winslow, which I still think is very very, very strong, and definitely this team in South Jersey that's capable of finishing in the top five. I think there's a lot of teams that could possibly end up in the rankings at the end of the year and throughout the year.
Ryan, what are some of your thoughts about the top 20 that has caught you in an idea of, okay, these teams are maybe getting better, and then some other teams that are familiar names, but they got to start stacking some wins?
Yeah, so up north, Dan, we saw some changes aside from, the non-pubs in that top five now, with Winslow falling down, and then, Ultapan, Ramapo, Highlands, they're all kind of taking care of business recently. But West Morris, we mentioned on the last episode, and they earned their spot at number 20. And, it's going to have to keep winning to stay in the rankings. I'll say that, because they have a lot of winnable games ahead. And they've logged a couple nice wins, like we mentioned last week. So they've definitely earned it, but they got to keep it up to stay in. Their schedule gets, a little beefier towards the end of the year. They're the new team that's in, and everyone else stayed in. But, Primus Catholic, I don't want to say it's on its last leg, but, at 1 and 2, they got to start winning. They lost to Iona Prep, who's, a very good team, a top 100 team on High School Football America in the country. But the Paladins gave up 38 second quarter points. I've never seen a team, get gashed like that on defense. 38 points in one quarter.
What is the problem, Ryan? Like, they can put up points, but the problem is they are leaking like a sieve against St. Peter's, against Iona Prep, like you said, who's the best team in the state of New York. But it's been the same story over and over again for Coach Russo. They're not playing defense in any of these seasons.
Yeah, and we've talked about how talented they are offensively, and Chuk Udo is banged up for them. The running back they got from St. Thomas Aquinas, and I look at Achilles Dupont. This is a team that could run the ball and dominate the time of possession. Coach Russo knows what he's doing. He's a great coach. That coaching staff is very good. I wonder though if they control the ball, like could that make the defense a little less responsible for getting a ton of stops, and being on the field for a long amount of time. So I wonder if it's the tempo or whatnot, but offense isn't the problem. They just got to reel it in on defense. And I think over the course of the year, they're going to get better defensively. But I think they're going to have to keep it tight with St. Joe's, for us to have more confidence in them instilled. And Del Barton's kind of in the same discussion. They got a nice win last week over Monsignor Farrell out of Staten Island, but I'm curious to see how they do against St. Peter's this week, because St. Peter's is very, very good this year. They're playing both ways. They have guys up front. So, Del Barton has had their number in recent years, but it might be different this year. Like, this St. Peter's team might finally stop that skid, and I'm curious to see if Del Barton can keep it close. And the bottom line, both those teams are 1 and 2, and when those losses pile up, and even against that schedule, I mean, both teams play a really, really tough schedule. It's a different year for both teams. I guess it's kind of a rebuild in a way, but they play a very tough schedule, but they're also very talented, so they can pull themselves out of this. But the bottom line is, when the losses start piling up, you don't stay in our rankings, and that goes for our rankings. That goes for college football. So, they gotta, find a way to build some momentum here, and start winning.
Anybody else want to make a claim for a team that you feel maybe has been slighted or has that momentum that crack into the top 20? Or quite frankly, is there anybody that wants to stand in their soapbox now and say, I think this team is overrated and should be maybe out of the rankings?
Well, Dan, I don't know that we've hit that point yet, but I think Ryan touched on two teams that, could, after this coming weekend, be in that spot with Paramus Catholic and Del Barton. I know in the case of the Shore Conference, I feel like Sports Illustrated. I don't think any team wants me to put them in the top 20 because then once they get in, they immediately fall out. So
You're the kiss
uh,
of death.
I most certainly am. And I've puckered up quite a few times already this year. But, down the shore, we put Homedale in this week at 18, and they've honestly earned it. I do think Rumson Fairhaven is a victory over RBC away from getting back in or being able to come back in, and the same with Brick Memorial. I mean, Brick Memorial has games against Townsville North, Donovan Catholic, and Homedale in succession. They win those three games, they could be back in the top 20. And just a little bit about what we talk about on Sunday mornings. I'm not giving away the complete recipe on how we make the sausage, but one of the things we talk about every week is how you do in your biggest games. So if you don't play well in your biggest games, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's pretty solid, you're going to drop. It doesn't matter what you do against a lesser opponent, but in games that we feel are your biggest and your most important, if you don't play well in those, we're going to drop you in our rankings. We've proven that the last couple of years when we've knocked some of those, Big Six teams out midway through the year, Dan. And I don't think that's going to change for us. So, from our standpoint, Dan, change is a good thing. Change brings new readers in. So, um, while we would love to, be right from the first top 20 of the year, who belongs in and who doesn't, the chances of that happening are always rare.
All right, so that's a look at some of our top 20 teams and some of the discussion around that, courtesy of our guys here at this roundtable. Now, with our final segment of this episode, guys, we're going to be previewing, in your minds, some of the best and biggest matchups in week 3. And we'll start off with Ryan Patty. Who do you have as one of those games that, if you're a high school football fan in New Jersey, you got to circle and you got to read up about what transpired in that game? What's your big week 3 game?
Yeah, Dan, up north, there's a lot of really good games. I mentioned SJR against PC. The Green Knights go to Paramus. I think Paramus Catholic has some firepower to make it interesting. I would probably pick St. Joe's in that game, but I think it could get interesting if certain things, go certain ways. But St. Peter's against Del Barton, I mentioned that. I think the game that I'm looking forward to most is Ramapo against Oltapan because it always delivers. It's two towns that hate to lose, two towns that love sports. They're good in just about every sport. But football probably means the most to them, right? Oltapan has won 2 of the last 3 Group 3 titles. Ramapo was in the Group 4 semis last year, and they're a team that is very capable of making another deep run. Ramapo had won this matchup 5 years in a row. And Oltapan snapped that streak last year, with Maselli and Orecchio doing their thing out of that 2-quarterback system. You had the chance to call that game last year, and Maselli's had a strong start to the year this year, and so has the rest of the cast for Oltapan. I mean, we've talked about Brian Dunn ad nauseum. We know how great of a coach he is, but look at what Ramapo's doing again. They started 0-3. We mentioned it last year, and they went on a run. They almost ran the table all the way to the Group 4 final, and they lost in the semis. Casey Grosser has proven to be one of the fastest learners that I've seen. And, he has 2 really talented older brothers, set examples for him, but, also a great coaching staff there led by Nick Gattuso. So I'll be at this game in Oltapan on Friday. I very much look forward to it, for another year. And I'm expecting a game with a mix of good offense and good defense. I mean, both these teams can do it on both sides of the ball, and it's going to be a fun one. I think it's going to come down to the final couple minutes, maybe the final drive.
That's a great rivalry in Bergen County. Bill, what are a couple games that you're looking at down in South Jersey for week 3?
Yeah, I want to start with Cumberland against St. Joe's Ham, and I definitely did not think coming into the season I would be talking about this game. I mean, Cumberland has had one winning season in the last 15 years. That was in 2022. They went 6-3. They haven't made the playoffs since 2014, which at that was a season when they went into the playoffs at 3-6 with wins in their last two games and just snuck in on the final week, and obviously went out pretty quickly. Cumberland is now 3-0. They are, they have a they have a good running back in R.J. Pierce. The first PowerPoints came out this week. They're sitting at fifth. I know it's very early. Right now, Winslow is actually 12th. I'm sure that would not be a matchup that Cumberland would be hoping for if they went back to the playoffs. But they're an intriguing team, and every game on their schedule is one that they can win. I think they're definitely on their way back to another winning season, and if they keep winning at this pace, I think they're probably going to be in the postseason. St. Joe's Ham was obviously a traditional small school power. They were the standard bearers in what used to be Group One or Group Two or whatever group that they ended up in. But when Paul Sacco and St. Joe's parted ways, a couple of years ago, that program had to start over. A lot of the kids left, and Ron Dorsey took over. They were 0-9 that first year against a challenging schedule. They got a little bit of schedule relief last year and won a couple games, won two games, and they've matched that already this year. They're 2-0. They're coming off an overtime win over Apsagami, which was a big win for them. And they're starting to, obviously they're not what they were a few years ago, but they're starting to kind of build a little bit, and I think this will be a big win for either one of those programs. So kind of looking forward to it on Thursday night, and then we also have Haddonfield and Seneca. Haddonfield is obviously a traditional Group Two power. Started the season, battled Glassboro, hung in there for close to a half, and probably gave Glassboro the biggest test that Glassboro is going to face all season. They've bounced back with a couple wins since. Brought back almost their entire team from a squad that won 7 games and made the sectional semis last year, and I think has a chance to be a sectional title contender. And Seneca's, they've made this is a program that's kind of quietly become one of the better ones in South Jersey. They've made a couple deep playoff runs, played for a few sectional finals, including last year. Have a very good junior dual threat quarterback in Anthony Tarico. They're undefeated to this point and could be a team that could break through in Group 3. And I think this could be a really outstanding matchup this weekend.
All right, Mike Kinney, give me a juicy matchup in the Big Central Conference for this week.
Yeah, I think this is a prove it week for several of those Big Central teams. At the beginning of the segment, I talked about Big Central teams sort of on the cusp of the top 20. Well, here's a chance for them to kind of get off that and prove themselves. And that game Saturday, Elizabeth against St. Joe's Metuchen, I think, is a classic example of that. Two great quarterbacks who are capable of doing tremendous things with their teams, and I think the teams now are both strong enough to support them and have a running game to complement the passing. So Justin Scaramouche of St. Joe's and Eric Fleming of Elizabeth, I think, have a game here that is going to have some top 20 thought there if some teams lose this week. I don't think there's any question about that. And I'd say one other game, not so much the game itself, but because it's such a big rivalry game. Hunterdon Central's coming off a big loss to Phillipsburg last week, and they had gone into that game at 2-0, so that was a big disappointment. But they're playing Bridgewater. Bridgewater's 3-0, and Bridgewater's a team that is ready to kind of prove itself as a top 20 team, I think, with Declan Credilla at quarterback there and guys like Denzel Amofo and Jameer Black, who are both surprising running backs this year. They go to 4-0. That's a team we got to consider if there's some movement in the top 20 this week. So this is a big prove-it week for several of those teams. Piscataway against Ridgewood is another team in the BCC with a lot to prove this week if they're really truly going to make a run and be top 20 consideration.
And Joe Zadalis, what is the Week 3 game that's jumping out to you down in the Shore Conference?
Before I go into that one, Dan, there are a couple interesting matchups that I'm going to have my eye on. I mentioned earlier Asbury Park's playing at Ocean. Asbury Park being a Group 1, Ocean being a Group 3. Asbury has looked unstoppable thus far, so that's an interesting game. Point Beach at Monmouth is another game, another small division game that is interesting. And then Madawane's at Red Bank, and Madawane's an interesting case. They lost in week 0 to Heightstown. In that game, they had only 96 yards rushing. Last week, they blew away previously unbeaten Manasquan 36-22 with 276 pass yards from Blair Carter Gangeron and 194 yards on the ground. But the big game is all the way down in Manahawkin. Brick off to a 3-0 start against 3-0 Southern. This game might be over in an hour and 45 minutes, and that includes halftime. They both like to run the ball first. Brick quarterback James Hertz leads the Shore Conference in rushing and scoring. He has played Brick Township's read option like a Stradivarius violin. Brick's averaging 33 points a game and 324 yards per game. Brick hasn't put up numbers like that in 4 or 5 years. A little bit of caution. Brick's 3 opponents are a combined 0-9 and have scored 57 points between them. But the thing is, Brick is 3-0, and there are plenty teams that aren't 3-0 across the state. I saw Southern last week in their 34-0 win over then undefeated Central and came away impressed. Longtime head coach Chuck Donahue Jr., who's 50 years in, 51 years in, has a team that seriously plays within its capabilities. There's no attempt by the Southern Regional coaching staff to put the square peg in the round hole. Southern has a backfield by committee. They've got a quarterback in Carson Amato who makes good decisions, takes what he's given, and every once in a while he'll flee the pocket and put some yards up with his feet. Southern, however, wins and loses with how its guys with their hands in the dirt play. Offensively, all they want to do is knock you around. As one of the running backs at Southern told me last week, all we want to do is drain an opponent, and that's what they do. They just keep hammering at you. On defense, the Southern front is like a bunch of fire hydrants. They don't move. That lets the linebackers roam free. That lets them do some creative things in the secondary. I think it's going to be a really, really good football game, and one that will go a long way toward determining which team wins Class B South, Dan.
Remember, fans, that from the opening kickoff to the end of the season, NJ.com's award-winning staff of reporters and photojournalists put you in the middle of the action. For in-depth coverage of all these games around New Jersey, including photo galleries, recaps, and stats, be sure to visit NJ.com/HSSports. And a reminder, fans, that you could catch some games of the week broadcast-wise on NJ.com this weekend, as on Friday night, I will be at Sparta, as Newton will take on Sparta at 6:30 in a Super Football Conference showdown. And then on Saturday afternoon, the big game that Mike Kinney has been alluding to, Elizabeth at St. Joe's Metuchen. Kickoff is slated for a 1 p.m. start time. Any fans can watch those games live and on demand as NJ.com subscribers at NJ.com/watch. So that'll do it for another episode of the Jersey Blitz. I'd like to thank my compatriots Ryan Patty, Bill Evans, Joe Zadalis, and Mike Kinney for joining us. Also like to thank David Liss for helping to produce this episode. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week on the Jersey Blitz, your home for NJ.com football coverage. Take care, everybody.